Welcome to this workshop on journals and publication venues. There's several different purposes for that. One of the purpose of the workshop is that you probably saw yesterday in the email that we received from Ileana on behalf of the Dean, where it talked about workload and workload standards. In that document, there was a reference to a vetted journal list within the college. So also the Dean made a reference in the document that I will have a series of workshops on that. And so I just wanted to mention a little bit about this, or put it in context of that, explain what that vetted list is, where it comes from. But I thought I'd couch that more in the broader sense of developments in the academic journal world that really have happened and that had a tremendous impact in the last year or so. There have been really radical changes in journal classification happened, and it might be good to be aware of that. So let me share my screen and open a PowerPoint and put that in presentation mode. Do you see the big presentation mode, or do you see my presenter? Yes. Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, so this is just a brief overview of different things and different tools. So there are about 46,000 academic journals out there. Wow. 2 million journal articles published a year. I mean, this is across the whole world of publishing, all fields, not just education. But as you can see, there's a tremendous increase, right? In just 10 years, we got 10,000 more journals. I mean, more than 10,000 more journals. I'm mentioning that because there, in the world of publishing and requirements for publishing, there also has been quite a bit of bad players. There have a lot of journals that have been purely for profit. Review is nearly non-existing. I mean, maybe you have seen journals that had a special issue that said, send it on Friday, get feedback next Wednesday, publish on Friday the next week, right? These things are predatory journals. So I want to mention that. Now, there is still a bit of an assumption about quality of journals, that journals where you pay for articles are of lower quality, which is not the case. For example, in STEM education, most journals require you to pay, unfortunately. Wow. They expect that to be part of your grant budget. So in STEM education, most reputable journals have a page fee, and that can be quite high. I have paid between $1,000 to $1,500 an article just to get that. Once it's being reviewed, it's not being charged beforehand. So this is a reality for many STEM education researchers. In many other fields in education, that is not necessarily the case, that you pay for that. But for pay does not mean bad journal in that sense. So there's different ways of how we can think about why we publish, right? There are still key indicator of scholarly contributions. There are, in a way, a prerequisite for grant funding. If you write grants, you have to say, what have you worked on? What's relevant preliminary work or previous work you have done? It's about national reputation. Most people talk about personal impact and also journal impact. I would also say we need to think about community impact. Our community has a larger impact in a national discourse of what education is when we also publish. So we are kind of promoting the community's impact by publication. And then there's, of course, the loose term of scientific obligation. I mean, this is part of our job, part of what we are hired to do. This community impact, I want to unpack a little bit with telling the story of our communities to others and communication of importance of issues that we are facing or we are experiencing in our communities. There is, of course, questions I heard lately was like, okay, we have research practice partnerships. We do a lot of community-driven. We have a lot of community-driven research, and then it's the question, why publish in scholarly outlets which are not practitioner-oriented? I heard that a couple times when I talk with colleagues in the college. Or the argument about what we're doing doesn't fit with established outlets of scholarships. Our work doesn't get into journals. We are doing case studies, whatever methodology you want to choose, and they don't fit in journals and that are existing. What I would say as kind of an answer to these both is, it's an interesting aspect. We are scholars. Our practice is different than from the communities we work with. It is automatically. We are not the practitioners in school. I mean, there's one structural thing that might highlight that even. We have a level of tenure. Once we become associate professors with tenure, we have a level of tenure that nobody else in the community has. We are a lot more protected than many people we work with in practice. What we do still has to withstand the test of our peers, and our peers are the academic community. I'm not publishing, not subjecting our own work to other people's scrutiny who do similar work and come from a similar scholarly work is, I think, not helpful to our quality of our own work. So I'm only want to work in outlets that speak to practitioners of our field. While that is important, I'm not speaking against publishing in practice and practitioner-oriented journals. But if you're not publishing in scholarship, at what point do we know when we're off? When what we're doing is not really the cutting edge anymore, or not really informed by best practices from others. Because on the one hand, if we have to withstand the test of our peers, our own work needs to be informed by others. So it's funny when we cite people's work, but not contributing to that work that we're citing. So that kind of goes both ways. What we do need is really infuse this in existing discourse in our fields with our work. And that is a tremendous opportunity for us because we're sitting in a very different space. We have different students. We have unique contributions to make to our field. For example, I had an email exchange with my former dean from University of Missouri, who is now at the University of Illinois in Chicago, dean. And she mentioned, for example, there are also an HSI. And she's like, yeah, I would love to have people actually know more what that means, serving Hispanic students. That is something we are slowly building. And so that was one of the things she mentioned, and she asked me for references, and she asked me for it just came up in a chat. She asked me, what does it mean to having done that for so long, and why don't I read that much about that in different venues that are existing? So this is kind of also an opportunity for us. I wanted to stop here because I'm touching on. I'm making here a slide that goes over some really big stuff right early on. So I wonder if there's any comments or anything like that, or any additional information or additional questions you might have.
Johannes, let me just chime in. This last issue that you addressed regarding something that we have been talking for a long, long time at UTEP, which is, that we believe and that we know how to deal with Hispanic students, and now becoming a recognized Hispanic serving institution. I think we're still talking about it, but we have not capitalized on that aspect. We in the EDD program, we have about 3 teams visiting us to accredit us, to review us so we can enter the professional organizations. And invariably, those teams have made the comment to us that we are sitting in a gold mine, and sort of the context in which we are, not only in a trans-border land, but also the kind of students we serve with the characteristics that they have, and again that we could just take advantage of that. I'm still thinking a lot about that because again, like you said, there is not much being written and published that takes all those aspects into account. And I think that should be probably a research agenda that we sit down and think about it and say, hey, how do we do this systematically? Because I recognize that a lot of people are doing it, and some of them are here in this presentation, but how do we do it systematically and consistently that we become a reference point for the rest of the nation?
Well, one comment. Thanks for sharing that, Rodolfo. One comment I would have is we have right now this cluster research call within the university, and I know we have several people, and we have a meeting scheduled for the people who are interested in well-being of teaching, teachers, the broadest sense. That might be also one of the research clusters to look at that more specifically and say, maybe in collaboration with the Natalicio Institute, on maybe groups on campus that really define and on the forefront on what it means to do Hispanic servingness. So that could be one way to address that more on a systematic basis. We'll have more time to discuss, so I'll go right into it with a little bit. One of the things we're talking a lot of time with articles and journals is peer review, right? It started a little bit of historical thing. It's mostly the blindness in attempts to improve the quality of reviews. There are quite a bit of problems with peer review, which are widely acknowledged. It is essentially an integral part of consensus building. There's another assumption oftentimes when we have, for example, open access journals that you can read and without logging in, without a paywall, like no journal publisher really behind it, that they're of lower quality. But a lot of open access journals, for example, have also double-blind peer review. So they have quality, but they also have access, just as an information. This is a little story. I leave that here. I'm not going too much detail. The slides will be available to you. This is a story from Thomas Huxley, who complains that probably his memoirs won't be published because of some guy who probably stops him in the review process. So he has to do his own political maneuvering to get around. So this is a pretty old story of reviewer number 2. Maybe you hear that as the reviewer that always is more harsh than actually necessary or needed or even constructive. There are some caveats around peer review. They can really greatly vary by journal. So you have procedures, what is confidential, how comprehensive it is. There is reject without external review, sometimes also called desk rejects. It is a bit of a social and scientific process to balance as an editor, because you have personalities playing a role, and you have, of course, journal editors, reviewers are different. And so they have different perspectives to that. When I was founding a journal, the Journal of Pre-College Engineering Education Research, it was interesting to see how the journal itself became something over time by the way in which we established a culture of review or a culture of development for others. And so journals have to be pretty specific about that, explicit about that when they want to become that. There's a little video you can watch that. It's interesting about the review process, just for information purposes. There is, in the publishing language, there's something called minimizing presentation defects. What that is there are things there have been studies done on what makes reviewer more or less reject papers. And of course, there are content and subject matter or specific, methodologies you have used or whatever. But presentation defects often go to spelling and grammar and poor wording choices, or poor choice of visuals, or hardly readable visuals. There have been one study that compared the same journal article submitted to 2 sets of reviewers in the same journal. One got a minor acceptance, the other one got a reject, and the only variation was actually formatting and grammar and spelling. So that's presentation defects. That can go also into claims, like if you do very broad claims, nobody ever has studied this particular thing, therefore I'm doing a research question in that space, tends to rub people the wrong way, because people, if they just know one article that is close in that space, they will say, well, that's over-exaggerated. I'm not really happy to read that. That's just not done well. So that's kind of like this more or less cautious writing. Of course, how you communicate back with reviewer comments and suggestions. For example, I had to learn that the hard way in my first journal articles. When I got comments back, I addressed the paper and sent it back. Nobody told me that you actually should write a nice letter to the editor explaining everything you did and make a table and say, like, this is how we addressed it. I'm like, okay, I worked on it, I've done it, so here's the new paper. I thought that was sufficient. Obviously not. So, this is an dialogue, it's communication, it's how you communicate. And I would really recommend, if you have a journal that you really like, and a journal where you also consider, this is one where I would like to publish in, serve as a reviewer. This goes a similar way with journal, with grants. If you have any programs you want to be a grant writer and grant proposal writer for, serve the year before as a reviewer. You get a lot of insights on what is valued, how people perceive things. It's not the same committee, but it can be helpful. So let me talk a little bit about available tools. And they're a bit hard to come by, and some of them are a little bit outside of the education realm, but nevertheless, they can be helpful. So when you're talking about doing quantitative research, presenting quantitative research, there are some really established guidelines for how to represent quantitative data in journal articles. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are structures, tables, APA has tables, but APA, for example, has this wonderful quantitative research design resource where they give you all kinds of guidelines on how to actually write up quantitative work. If you do clinical trials, there is something called CONSORT, the Consolidated Standards of Reporting Trials. Or if you do meta-analyses and systematics reviews, you have the Cochrane Consortium, you have PRISMA. How you describe diagnostic tests. I know some of you are working in mental health and counseling education, might be relevant for you. Even how to write quality improvement reports or statistical biomedical studies. So we have some people who do biomedical work, like with hair sample research. There are standards that are existing for accepted quantitative guidelines on how to present them in papers. There are also accepted qualitative guidelines when you want to come more from this side. So there's the guidelines for critical review form, which is a qualitative a framework. There is the consolidated criteria for reporting qualitative research, mostly when you do interviews and focus groups. There is the NTRAC, transparency in reporting synthesis. So that's more synthesis of qualitative research. Then you have a very poorly chosen word of a term called RATS, the Relevance, Appropriateness, Transparency Protocol. And then, as you probably know, APA guidelines are quite limited in that space. They are really coming more from a quantitative space. But these are recommendations of how to present your work from different paradigms of research that are more or less more acceptable in the literature. And if you phrase it as such, if you structure your article like that, and even mention this article I'm structuring after NTRAC, Enhancing Transparency in Reporting, then you can follow not a necessarily recipe and template, but it gives you also a ground to say what information are usually people report, in which I could report myself as well. Again, the slides are available. These ones are linkable. The other ones, I can still add links if you want, but if you Google from the quantitative ones, if you look for these terms, you usually find the links for that. Then there is something called Ulrichs Web, and I'm not sure how many of you have used Ulrichs Web. It is available through UTAP Library. And let me stop sharing for just a moment and open my browser to share. If I find it, too many bloody openings. This might be it. So we have the database in UTAP. We have Ulrichs Web. I guess I have to log in. And no, I'm not sharing my password. Here we go. Slow loading, so bring up an earlier result I have. So I punched in learning sciences. This database is a global database of journals, but also print magazines and all kinds of proceedings and all kinds of other things. So you can find there quite a bit of information from different journals and different outlets. It's not just journals, it's also proceeding, it's also monographic series. So for example, Springer has a series on Chinese language learning sciences. So you would find all kinds of information there. How long is it there? Active? Is it reviewed? So you find a lot of different information. You can search and limit your results quite a bit. You can look more nuanced for particular subfields. So this is a great resource when you are unsure, when you get like an invitation for a journal, for example, and you're like, yeah, let me see if it's an Ulrichs Web. If not, then rather it's probably predatory. This is a pretty comprehensive list. There was actually a non-list, so to speak. There was a list run by librarians who added one predatory journal after the other. And then they run into the issue that one publisher who had 1,000 predatory journals in their portfolio sued them for defamation. So they had to take that list down. So the library field went rather the other way and said, let's make a yes list and not a no list. So we can't be defamed and nobody can force their way into a list if we have our own criteria. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. So Ulrichs Web, great resource for looking, but they, as I mentioned, they also have popular magazines, newspapers, newsletters, so it's not just academic stuff. So that's why they have 300,000 titles in there. As I mentioned before, there are only about 46,000 journals. Journal selection. It's important that audience matters. I always see journals. There's different ways of seeing journals. You can see a journal as a publication outlet for your work. You can also see a journal as a community. It's a community of scholars who are usually editors, reviewers, authors. There are people who are really in the community, very, very invested, and then others who just write, or a larger party that reads, but consider it a community. And in that sense, it's a question, where do you want to spend your time in community work? What communities do you want to publish in order to be seen, and who are the people who also use Cite as part of your community? I realized just, yeah, no, I'm good. There are pecking orders of journals in your field. You probably know that there are top-ranked journals, considered top-ranked journals, and we go a little bit into that further on. In the questions you might investigate about journals under consideration, we're going into that right now. So here's basic selection questions and tools where you can find them. Is it peer-reviewed? If it's not peer-reviewed, it probably won't count much in our world. What's the focus? What's the scope of it? What is your audience? Is it important for you to have publisher? Who is the publisher? Is it an Wiley or Taylor Francis or Springer or something like that? Scope, which is very similar to actually the focus area. Is it indexed and abstracted? And we come to that in a moment, what that means. Who owns it? It's quite interesting and important sometimes to look. The other resource or tool that shows up here is another one of the tools in our library called WorldCat, which is the World Catalog of Books. So chances are, if you're looking for a book, you will find it in WorldCat. And so WorldCat gives you also about anything about any publishing house that is in the market. Then you have impact factors, and we'll go to that a little bit because that comes from our website called Journal Citation Index or Journal Citation Reports. How reviews of journals, like people also rate journals, they give reviews. If a journal falls behind in addressing basic needs of like didn't publish for the last 2 years or don't respond to reviews for decades, that would show up there. And then you have the acceptance and rejection rate is usually published by publishers. So that's all good questions to ask in terms of selection. So keep in mind about when you make decisions that there are a lot of perspectives to take into consideration. Not just, is that a journal that is top tier in my field, but also have they published similar work that I did? Is that an audience, a community I want to talk to? How visible is it? What are the acceptance and rejection rates, right? If they're very low acceptance rate, maybe not going there. If articles take 2-3 years to get published in there, then that might be not really wise to go to these journals to publish when you're an assistant professor going up for tenure soon. So all of these things I want you to consider. It's as good of a choice early on before you actually write your work. When we talk about, in the past, when we talked about rankings, a ranked journal, the older term was ISI Thomson Reuters ranking. Thomson Reuters got bought out. This is a Thomson Reuters logo. You sometimes still find it on their references, but they're bought out by Clarivate. And you have 2 editions. You have science and you have social science. There are education journals in both sides. It's a bit funky how they put them in one and the other. Most of them, of course, are in social science, but there's some in science. For example, STEM education journals are to be found usually in science and in social science. Check both editions. They have subject categories. They have an impact factor, which is calculated to show a little bit where that is. And they are available through the databases called Web of Science. I can show that if it's wanted, where to find these particular journals. Impact factor, I don't want to go into that too much, but it is a formula developed in the 1950s, which reflects the average number of citations to recent articles published as a proxy measure for importance of the journal in the field. And they can range the impact factors. And actually in sciences, the impact factors are a lot higher than in the social sciences. For example, here you have, these are the top 5 journals right now in the impact factor. You have Education Sciences, Frontiers in Education, International Journal of Qualitative Studies, Journal of Transformative Education, International Journal of Instruction. If you haven't heard of them, maybe there's good reasons for that, but I will share a large list with you with vetted journals, etc., where you can actually browse, and I'll show you how to do that. Here is the massive change that I mentioned that happened within the last year. This is a quote from Clarivet, message from July 2023. As of July 22, we have extended to the journal impact factor to all quality journals in the Web of Science core collection, Arts and Humanities Citation Index, and now the big hammer, and Emerging Sources Citation Index. The Emerging Sources Citation Index are journals which were considered candidacy journals. There were journals that were vetted, they are available, they are very broadly not making it into the high-ranked journals yet, because that takes a while. It's a 10-year process. You have to prepare and apply to get in there. Some journals chose not to, but this is a wide range. The Emerging Sources Citation Index is a wide range of journals that are already on a level of scrutiny. And these all are now included in the journal impact factor. We don't have now an exclusive list of, before it was like about 100 journals that got an impact factor. We have now a list of 887 journals in education. This is just education, right? This is not social sciences. So you see here, the SS is Social Science Citation Index, S is the Science Citation Index, and ES is the Emerging Sources. So you have education, educational research in both the emerging and in the social. You have education special, which is special education. You have that in the social sciences and in the emerging. Funny enough, the emerging had actually less than the auxiliary accepted. You had then the education scientific disciplines, which was in science. So these are STEM education and other scientific journals dealing with education. And both the list, the Science Citation Index and the Emerging Sources had both 42. Total 887 journals in education. The college will use for work standards a vetted journal list. We call it VEACH. I'm open for any new names. This is just random acronyms. I didn't want to give some other thing. But if you have any better names for it, please let me know. I'm really bad in acronyms. And then we also said in the document by the dean, it also was mentioned that it will be supplemented with departmental list approved by college. So the department has also a chance to look at journals and say, these are important for us, scholarly journals. They are important to us. They might not show up here for a wide variety of reasons. One of the reasons some journals don't show up here are because they're considered too niche. You wouldn't raise to a level of acceptance or level of being really incorporated because of too niche. That does not mean they're not high quality journals. So we are actually supplementing that with a process where each department comes up with a list, and that can be journal and high quality proceedings. So a way to look at journal impact is H-index and G-index. And so the H-index you might have heard about as a way of looking at journal impact. For example, if you go to Google Scholar, you find also a personal H-index of people. And I'll come to that a little bit back. This is another way of looking at journal impact. This is calculated in a bit of a looser way, not as stringent as the impact factor formula that was adapted in the 1950s. Why I'm showing this is you might run into journals that publish their H-index or G-index, and then they're also communicating, yes, we might have a very low impact factor, but we also have an H-index for people who look for that more. So I mentioned that already. They might have a medium to high impact. but they might have a low H or G index and the other way around. But the emerging source citation index actually includes both of them. So this is the big change where they went away from just using impact factor in the journal citation. There is no standard ranking. Some fields have very low H index, so number of citations per article, and they have a low impact factor. Again, it might be niche, it might be small, it might be a smaller community. This does not mean it's lower quality. That's why the college in our standard guideline, why we said these need to be supplemented with accepted high quality journals that you know of. I could look, for example, at one in the educational technology field. There is one called ETRD, the Educational Technology Research and Development. That journal, if you get a paper in there as an assistant professor, you made it. That's kind of the journal of the field. When you look at impact factor, HFAC index, it's not great. It's in that list of journals, but it's certainly not one of the top ones. But if you're in educational technology, everybody knows that journal. So that's kind of the type of journals we're looking then for, that come more identified by each discipline or field that we have represented. So I'll have, as a process, look for Lewis Ulrich as a quick overview, look at the JCR for impact and subject categories, still check out the journal website. I would keep a record of what you're reading, in which journals are you reading, most likely. That informs you theoretically, methodologically, that also might be then where you also want to publish. And you might need to communicate where you worked on and what you considered as part of also your promotion tenure package. This might be something good to indicate when you do your publications in the tenure and promotion package, to indicate where is the journals coming from. I'll stop here with the PowerPoint, and I'll go, my next thing would be to go to the list of journals that I mentioned. I'll share, of course, the link with you. You can look at it as well. But are there any questions so far?
Just for clarification, can you hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So just for clarification, you are gonna let us know where we can find that College of Education approved list, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm actually putting the link right now into the Google chat, in the Zoom chat.
I think this, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
This might be the best place, might not be the best place to talk about that, but I saw the standard about our publication expectation. So we have to publish at this journal at least one, those kind of standard.
Yes.
So, okay, I will talk about that later.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, there's discussions on the standard we can have as well. The standard document mentioned one of the journals. If you're going for a standard faculty appointment, standard research, not research intensive, not teaching intensive, the expectation would be that one out of your two journals comes from that list, and then the other one can come from that list and from a departmentally vetted list in addition. So let me share the screen. So we're here. This is a vetted list. If you look at it, it is actually slightly longer. This has 1,514. And the reason why it has 1,514 is a bit odd. The reason for that is I went through all of these 800, whatever, 87 I mentioned, and I classified them based on our fields and other fields in education. This is not to mean when you look at it and say academic psychiatry, maybe I have misclassified that, but I classified it as mental health ed right now. This shows up in the education journals. the classification is meant to be helpful for anybody to find briefly what are they actually looking for. That meant I had each journal classified. That means some of them show up multiple times, like this one, because they're classified as computer science education, STEM ed broader, and educational technology. That's the type of articles you find. But if you go and do, for example, under data filter views, we'll add more, but I created a couple of obviously that's called mental health, not mental health. I'll change that. But if you click, for example, on health, mental health counseling, you get only the selection of journals that are in that field. If you go back to data and say exit view, you're seeing the entire list again. If you go to data, filter view, administration, leadership, management, you get all the all the journals that I classified. There is one classification in there that is a bit broader. So let me do that, and I can show you how you can set your own filter. So we will create more filters, so they will show up in this filter view. But if you want to create one, you can create a filter. I can create that right now for me because I'm showing it. You clear all selection. So you go on this little triangle, clear all selection, and say, I want only the ones that deal with early childhood. Click OK, you get all the journals that are in that list on early childhood. These ones come from my category. There is then one, let me exit out of the filter view, create a new filter. There's one category, I clear all, so I don't have the check marks on all. There's one category that is called Education General. These are journals that actually publish a wide range of educational topics. And you can see here, this is quite a long list of journals. Journal of Professional Capital and Community, Journal of Philosophy of Education. This one, for example, would also show up in a search on foundations, as like social cultural foundations that the tech program has. But for example, the Journal of Research on Educational Effectiveness, there you could imagine that there's a lot more things published. They don't necessarily care if it's STEM education or health education or counseling or bilingual. They look at effectiveness studies. So that is a cut across category, across all different types, like learning and teaching in higher education. Now, some of them you see, this is golf perspective. So some of the journals are more regional or limited in their geographical distribution. You have, for example, the Australasian Journal of Special and Inclusive Education, the Australian Educational Researcher. They are, however, accepting also papers and publishing papers also from other parts of the world. So this is not necessarily, you might have to make a good reason why you go there, but I'm saying not all of them, when they're regionally relevant or regionally classified, are not taking papers. A good example, for example, is the British Educational Research Journal. That is like the American Educational Research Journals. They're taking papers from everywhere in the world. This is British because they're published in Britain, but that's not their geographic scope. But that would be then important to read if, for example, the Asia Pacific Journal of Teacher Education, if they say in their scope, we're only interested in stuff that is published coming out of an Asia Pacific context, then you know, well, I'm not doing that, so this is not a venue for me. Any questions either on the tool itself or on searching within it? As I mentioned, we will create more filters for everyone, for all departments, for all things. So every search term that I put in can be searched. All journals, you can, of course, if you get rid of the total view, you can see all of them, and you can disagree or agree with my classification. That's not the point. The point is that they are available to you as journals. So any questions? Yes.
Yes, John, so this list that you vetted, is this going to be an ongoing, evolving list that journals can be added to this?
So this list will be updated based on updates in the this list will be updated based on what is published in the Journal Citation Index online. And of course, they make changes. This is not the departmental vetted list, the departmental list, which then is a supplement to that.
Yeah, because I don't see, I couldn't find any counseling journals here. But I don't know if that's just because it's like you said, a niche area, why it's not here.
Well, let's see. The intervention in school and clinic, there are very few. Journal of Psychologists and Counselors in Schools, Teaching of Psychology, which technically would fall into that space based on their scope. But yes, there might be not much. And then the department would say, what is important for us? What are other journals where we are publishing? And then that would be a good case for actually making even an addition to this particular journal list. Yes.
But in that case, based on the criteria, we have to publish in these journals at least one, and then we have to use that supplementary list. So if I do not see any flagship journal from our field, it would be problematic for me.
Yes. That's why I'm mentioning counseling is a good example. There's very little in there where we can say, since there is very little in that list, that would work toward that would be disadvantageous to you. So we can actually, in that case, make your suggested journals, once they are proposed by the department and vetted by a college committee, we can add them to that list. This is also something where you, for example, when the dean sent the workload criteria around, you can actually say in your contextualization and operationalization of that workload strategy that, for example, the counseling field, 2 articles can come from the department vetted list, because that is then more broader and more comprehensive than this list that we have here. This is not meant to exclude you from the journals that you value and that are important in your field. It is about guidelines and starting point to discuss quality, and that we make a more cohesive effort of thinking about where do we actually publish. So the process, as I mentioned, we will have a research committee in the college. So when a department proposes something, a list of journals, they would say, here we found them. This is why they are important in our field as scholarly journals, not necessarily practitioner journals, but scholarly journals. You can also list practitioners' journals. That is a valid source for a department list, but I would like a bit of a classification. And then this department list will come to a committee where one of your department is also representative on that, and we will approve that list for the department as a valid list. But this is all coming from, that list comes entirely from department as supplement. Any other questions, concerns?
Yeah, I do have a comment. Johannes, thank you for starting this discussion, and I hope it will be not a single event. I truly think this need to be something that we could do on ongoing format, perhaps as an example, when we invite presenters as STEMers, STEM education research, they not only present the topic, but they also share how do they publish it. So I think sharing how people publish papers in high quality journals is essential to share with everybody else, particularly for junior faculty. And I hope, again, you will take it further and perhaps make it as ongoing seminar on publishing. A second suggestion is on Friday, when you talked about the infrastructure to support research, I also see that most of the high quality journals are very specific in the text, the way that you write the text. So the editing becomes one of the obstacles for junior faculty specifically. Said that, are you considering perhaps having some sort of support structure within that infrastructure to help faculty with that? I will be I'll be a little careful when you say pay and publish is okay. I have a list of, for example, math education journals, top 25. You said most STEM journals pay and publish. I would not agree with that, and I would be careful sending that message to junior faculty. So out of the list of 25 top math education journals, I only see one that has article processing fee, unless you do open access publication, right? That also comes with a pay. But I would not encourage faculty to use pay and publish journals. Thank you.
There are high quality, like International Journal of STEM Education pay, in Journal of Engineering Education pay, International Journal of Engineering Education pay, IEEE Transactions on Education pay. They are high-end journals, and I do not want to discourage people from publishing in them because they are paid. They're not, that doesn't mean they're low quality or they're predatory or anything like that. It is what it is. Now there are, and I hope we can take that away also from this workshop or from this presentation. I hope we can take away also, there are 887 journals, meaning there are many journals here that you might not have encountered before. Maybe they haven't been on the radar. And very broadly speaking, right, when I went through that list and prepared and looked at the journals and classified them, etc., you know, there were journals that surprised me. I'm like, I had no idea. There's the European Physical Education Review, or there's, you know, whatever it is. There were journals that showed up on the radar where I started reading articles, and I'm like, that's interesting. And they are approaching publishing also differently. So I would not discourage people from going pay journals. It's about where do they fit, what is the quality of their work. In terms of the editing that you mentioned in the beginning, many of our research infrastructure would really be is really dependent on the amount of resources that we get. It is a bit of a chicken and egg thing. So when we write grants and we receive grants, each researcher involved in grant writing also gets a portion of the overhead. So that's each person who is involved in a grant as co-PI or PI. There's also resources that come to the college. And I have a lot easier time than fighting for additional resources if we also bring resources in through grants. This is how I know of an editing service in not an official editing service, but there's like certain papers and certain things, high profile things that can be sent off. It's an expensive endeavor to have like a native speaker, native English speaker going over it and doing editing. I don't want to overpromise, but you know, if that's something that bubbles up as a necessary infrastructure, that certainly when we get now an increase, hopefully in overhead through grants that we write, that is certainly something we can consider as one of the elements where we invest funding. I mean, we have a lot of journal publication opportunities, that even there are also journals in different languages out there. They are part of their journal list. There's several different Latin American, Spanish from Europe journals out there that might be also an opportunity for people to publish in. So yeah, I realize we are close to time, so you're more than welcome to send me any questions you have. And just to reiterate, one of the charges that came from the dean's office is about a departmental list that supplements this list that is important to you and your department or your discipline within the department. And then we will also have a call for a college-wide research committee that will have its own charge in shepherding this process as well, giving feedback, and that will have representation by all levels, assistant, associate, full, and all departments, so that we really have a good cross-section of people who are involved in the research enterprise here in the college. All right. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing. I know a couple of people had to go already. I wish you all the best. We'll make another section. Oh, Paul, you had your hand up.
No, I was saying goodbye.
Oh. So I wanted to mention, I'm planning, as the dean said, a series of workshops around that. So if you have any topic around publishing or anything research support-wise, write to Marcus and me. We'll get it on the books for a workshop. I'm more than happy to meet also in smaller group if it's not a workshop that you're looking for. We're here to help and support and provide you anything you need. All right.